Should DLC be eligible for Game of the Year? No. Should something like Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree be considered DLC in the first place? Would that lead to something like Shadow of the Erdtree being eligible for Game of the Year, in my opinion? Well, Ludo! Lingo! It looks like DLC is allowed to be nominated for Game of the Year at the Game Awards. Is this a problem? Do you care? Do I care? What's going on? Let's just talk about it a little bit. So clearly this is relevant this year specifically because of Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree coming out, and it obviously being one of the biggest parts of the year for video games. I'd have to think about it a little bit more, but it's definitely in like the top 3, top 5, whatever. And for a lot of people, it probably is up there as well. Since its release, I've been saying that it's probably my game of the year if it counts, but I don't think that it counts because people tend to not count DLC. I keep using air quotes a lot here because the problem is we don't have super solid definitions of what things are ever, and it leads to a lot of confusion. So we're assuming because this is DLC, it's not a fully fledged game, it does not qualify. Let me back up a second and say that this doesn't actually matter. I don't put a lot of stock in the Game Awards itself. To me, what I'm more interested in is the total amount of Game of the Year awards that a game gets from across the internet. That's more interesting to me. It's fun to watch the Game Awards, but it really doesn't have much meaning. When people ask what the Game of the Year is, I reference this website and look here, which a lot of the time it does align with what happens at the Game Awards itself, but sometimes it's just not. And it's also cool to see like what came in second and third and stuff. Anyways, in my opinion, Shadow of the Erdtree in times past would be a sequel. It is absolutely big enough and substantial enough to be its own game, and I'm kinda upset that it's not. I wish that this was Elden Ring 2. Clearly, they don't want to do something like that because it's not quite to the scale of Elden Ring itself. So if they were to slap a 2 on this thing, people would have absurd expectations that it must be exactly the same or bigger than the first game, which would then slap demerit points on it because for some reason that matters a whole lot to people. Shadow of the Erdtree is just Elden Ring, but better. And the fact that it's smaller is not a negative. That's actually a good thing. It makes it feel more dense. Anyways, this just brings up a lot of conversations about like what games and expansions and DLC really are moving forward. Because obviously you see a lot of games shifting towards a platform and then there's just constant updates, which is a completely different situation from something that just comes out and is barely updated and it's its own singular package. But then you have games that aren't multiplayer games necessarily that are also kind of treated as a platform and have updates to them. And then you have something like Elden Ring, which is its own totally, completely complete game. And then 2 years later, what would normally be in the past, the amount of time it would take to release a sequel, they're now releasing what is a sequel, but they like shoved it into the game itself. And to me, that's kind of a detriment because they had to work around a new system for leveling up and stuff that they wouldn't have had to do otherwise. I wish it was its own game, and I think it's kind of neat to treat it as if it's its own game in this situation because it easily stands toe-to-toe, if not towering way above, plenty of new fully complete games that released this year. I keep seeing it written that DLC should not count towards Game of the Year. It shouldn't be eligible. And I kind of agree with that. So what I take from that is to take a step back and not call something like Shadow of the Erdtree DLC in the first place. You know what I mean? I would like for us to move away from this platform nonsense and this like consistently adding things to games and instead being like, here's a game. It's just weird to me because something like Shadow of the Erdtree deserves massive recognition for being how incredible it is. And it's not going to get it because it's technically part of something else, even though realistically, in my opinion, it should be considered its own thing. And maybe it's the fault of the developer. Maybe I think it's just the fault of how the industry has like transformed recently. This should be considered a sequel, but even by the people making it, they're not considering it that. So why would we believe that? Why am I trying to convince you of that? I don't know, but I just felt like I wanted to put this out there. I feel like pretty much everyone's gonna disagree with me. That's fine. I just had some thoughts and I wanted to share them. What do you think? Feel free to follow me over on Twitch at dguns, Or head over to Backlogged if you want to see any of my reviews. I write up reviews for every game that I play. Also, check out my Patreon. For the most part, what I'm using it for is creation of YouTube shorts. And basically what it is that you ask me a question that is gaming related and I answer it by making a YouTube short. At the $5 tier, I'll do one a month, and then it increases from there. You can check it out over at patreon.com/doubleguns. Thank you to those that are supporting me on Patreon. We have the Mex Factor, Kinoth, Scion, Hookie, BioBadger, and Icy Bardog.